A Course in Miracles, copyright 2009. A note from the publisher. The manuscripts collection of A Course in Miracles, known as the Urtext Manuscripts, represents the ALDS. Available typed copy of the words dictated by a voice to scribe Helen Schucman. The voice, claimed Schucman, was Jesus. Most of the very personal material found early in the original shorthand notes is omitted. And significant dictated without notes material, which is not found in the original notes, is included in this edition. A small amount of rewriting also appears between the notes and the urtext. The urtext is not the first, or the original copy of the course, but it is very close, much closer than any other version in print. In extensive appendices, Doug Thompson maps out the complex ancestry of the 5 known historical scribal versions of the course, and the significance of some of the differences between them, which amount to as many as 48,000 words. The word urtext refers to a piecing together of earlier primary source material, to capture as accurately as possible an author's original intent, with no additions, omissions or modifications. The Urtext manuscripts are just that. Drawing from both the original dictation in the notes, and subsequent clarifications and expansions, Schucman and co-scribe William Thetford present in this document, almost the whole of the author's original dictation, with minimal editing and only a few minor, and apparently inadvertent omissions. The Urtext manuscripts predate all other editions of the course currently in print. The 1972 Hugh Lynn KCHLC manuscript of the text volume, which is the basis of the ACIM and original editions, published by the Course in Miracles Society CIMS, is a later heavily edited and abridged reworking of the urtext. The 1975 Foundation for Inner Peace FIP version, published in 18+ languages, is a substantial reworking of the HLC. Whether we believe the words of A Course in Miracles, W. authored by the historical Jesus of Nazareth, Dr. Helen Schucman, or some other voice, or demon calling himself Christ Jesus, it is certainly among the most profound discourses on universal themes ever conceived. While Schucman claimed the voice was that of Jesus, one need not accept any claims of authorship, to recognize the enduring value of the thought system and its insights into daily human life. In the Urtext manuscripts, the reader will appreciate the authenticity of the text as well as the textual scholarship. This is because it includes over 48,000 words edited out of most previously published versions. Discussions of sex and possession, Freud, the Bible, Edgar Cayce and Mary Baker Eddy, will be new material for many students and teachers of other versions. While some of this material consists of personal asides, not intended to be part of the course teaching, much was clearly intended for inclusion. Sometimes, the author's wish to have a topic included, is explicitly stated as in this remark on sex, which was omitted from other published editions. I want to finish the instructions about sex, because this is an area the miracle worker must understand. This volume is also the first attempt by any edition to engage the reader in the author's unique interpretation of the Bible and Christianity. With over 1,000 footnoted references to the Bible and its apparently Christian language, we might suppose A Course in Miracles is addressed to a Christian audience. Yet terms such as forgiveness, salvation, atonement, Christ, and even second coming, are the common vocabulary of universal spiritual reflection upon which Christianity has no monopoly. It is the vocabulary of the perennial or universal philosophy, common to religious and spiritual expression across the ages. A Course in Miracles has found an enthusiastic audience among millions of people, seeking a new voice in spiritual, if not biblical, insight. In the Urtext, Jesus asks us to consider the Bible anew. You have begun to realize that this is a very practical course, because it means exactly what it says. So does the Bible, if it is properly understood. There has been a marked tendency on the part of many of the Bible's followers, and also its translators, to be entirely literal about fear and its effects, but not about love and its results. Thus, hellfire means burning, but raising the dead becomes allegorical. Actually, it is particularly the references to the outcomes of love that should be taken literally, because the Bible is about love, being about God. Urtext T817. The companion 4.5 GB DVD and website. Offer a substantial research library with over 10,000 pages of primary source manuscripts, concordances and searchable e-texts, the biblical equivalent of finding the original manuscripts of the canonical Gospels. A fascinating digital audio reading of the 31-chapter text and other material is included exclusively on the DVD. To sum it as if we are listening to the voice of Jesus in real time. Readers are encouraged to participate in identifying unmarked biblical references, as well as any errors that may have slipped through our proofreading. Doug Thompson, scholar, researcher, commentator, editor, and compiler of this remarkable package, further invites reader participation in the process of creating a definitive edition of A Course in Miracles, with a dedication to accuracy being a goal Jesus is certain to appreciate. Aware that such a project will take many years of collaboration across several disciplines. Mr. Thompson has aptly stated, the goal here is not to have the last word on the word, it is simply to move toward the humbler goal of getting the words right. Doug Moncton, Peterborough, New Hampshire, USA. November 2008. Preface. By Doug Thompson. Those familiar with the editions of A Course in Miracles previously available will find this edition of the Urtext Manuscripts substantially different, especially in the early chapters of the text volume. Due to the fact that it is far closer to the original dictation, having been typed by the scribes before most of the subsequent editing and abridgment took place. While much more extensive documentation is provided in the appendices, in this preface I wish to very briefly summarize the major attributes of this work, explain what distinguishes it from other editions of A Course in Miracles and briefly describe the purpose behind its preparation and publication. Many will know that the course was first printed in 1976 by the Foundation for Inner Peace, FIP, that it has subsequently sold millions of copies, that it has been translated into many other languages, and that it is increasingly quoted in published works. The Foundation's claim that its version is virtually unchanged from the original inner dictation received by Columbia University psychology professor Dr. Helen Schucman, beginning in 1965, was widely accepted for many years. Schucman and her colleague Dr. William Thetford repeatedly retyped the original shorthand notes, and over the course of a decade that first manuscript was edited into the much shorter version that was published by FIP in 1975 as A Course in Miracles. This voice was, according to Schucman, unambiguously that of Jesus of Nazareth. Preface. In January of 2000, 3 earlier versions of the course emerged on the Internet which were dramatically different in the first 8 chapters. Far from being virtually unchanged, the early manuscripts not only contained a vast amount of previously unpublished material, they revealed in the later editing much that wasn't entirely removed was extensively rewritten, sometimes almost beyond recognition. Prior to 2000, only one version of the course was available, the abridged version published by FIP. The 3 earlier versions which have emerged are, in chronological order of their creation: the original shorthand notes, the scribe's first very lightly edited urtext, the scribe's second edit, the substantially abridged Hugh Lynn Casey version HLC. Our 4 versions then consist of these 3 manuscripts which had remained hidden for decades plus the abridgment of the HLC. Prepared by Schucman and Wapnick in 1973-74. Published by FIP beginning in 1975 is virtually unchanged, it is in fact the 4th major revision of which copies have surfaced, being some 8,000 words shorter and substantially rewritten in the early chapters. There is very good reason to believe that the scribes prepared additional manuscripts which either have not survived or are still being withheld from scholarship by their custodians. However many additional manuscripts there may be, these 4 very different versions of the course we currently have allow us to trace the extent and nature of the editing from the first scribing the notes to the last editing the 1975 abridgment, along with 2 points in between. An examination of the differences from one version to the next reveals a number of common elements. In each version some scribal errors were corrected. Due to a near-total lack of proofreading, there are many hundreds of copying errors from one version to the next. Many are dropouts in which a word or 2, a line or 2, a paragraph or 2, or in one case an entire page was inadvertently omitted. Most of these errors are reproduced in subsequent versions allo. with new ones introduced with each retyping, such that it is true that the more they edited it, the worse it got, in a very real and measurable way. Substantial segments which were not removed were rewritten, in some cases changing most of the words but not noticeably changing the meaning, and in other cases apparently altering the material unintentionally such that the original meaning is distorted or even entirely lost. The extent and frequency of rewriting increases over time. There is very little in the early editing in the Urtext manuscripts, and what there is really is minor. In the last edit there is a vast amount of rewriting which frequently entirely changes the meaning of passages. In some cases material is preserved accurately but is removed from the original topic of it is apart and placed in an entirely different discussion, thus altering the meaning of the passage and context. Again, there is very little of this at first, and considerably more in the later versions. While many of these differences are individually of little significance and would attract little notice if few in number, they are not few in number, and collectively the fact that there are thousands of them is of considerable significance. The complete removal of the lengthy discussion on sex and possession, whether one views its removal as a correction or a corruption, cannot be fairly described as a minor change. If we then consider the differences as a whole, it is fair to say that the net effect of such a vast number of mistakes is to substantially blur and in some cases distort the message which Schucman initially heard and committed to paper. Most who have read both this Urtext version and the later abridged versions find the earlier version to be much more readable and understandable. While the abridgment certainly retains most of the core message, it often does so in extremely condensed, abbreviated language which is missing large amounts of explanatory material and concrete examples illustrating the points being made. For the newcomer, being introduced to the concepts for the first time, the removal of these bridges and explanations can make the material seem incomprehensibly dense. In some cases, the editing changes introduce overt distortions. Some of the omitted material is in fact extremely significant. The Urtext says, "I want to finish the instructions about sex." Because this is an area the miracle worker must understand. Not just that line, but all the instructions about sex vanish in later versions despite the author particularly drawing attention to the vital importance of this material. Because each version contains some material not found in any other, and each version after the original notes corrects some errors in earlier versions, none of these four versions by itself includes the whole of the dictation and none is without flaws. The Urtext has several advantages relative to the other versions. It has much less editing than any later version. It does have a few changes however, and they are predominantly of three kinds. Dictated corrections are incorporated, where the notes contains dictated instructions for correcting previous material. In the Urtext the instructions are usually removed and the corrections are made as instructed. There is at least one exception where the dictated corrections were not made. The instruction to capitalize cause and effect, for instance, is recorded but the words were not subsequently capitalized. In a few cases the dictated instructions remain. The addition of a dozen or so dictated it note segments which appear to be genuine dictation added after the initial scribing as expansion, clarification or correction of previous points. While not present in the notes, most of this material is preserved in subsequent editions, having been accepted by all subsequent editors as authentic despite its absence from the notes. The omission of most of the entirely personal comments generally involve discussions between Schucman and the voice about personal relationship matters, dreams, and the like. This material was clearly never intended to be part of the course and its removal is directed by the voice. Aside from those three differences, each of which can be viewed as an enhancement vis-a-vis the notes, very little of the rearrangement and rewriting so noteworthy in the later editing appears in the Urtext. While there are some dropouts of words and phrases, there are not many compared to the later versions. In order to determine what the original dictation really was, all the changes made to any particular passage need to be traced and evaluated through all the versions. In most cases it is fairly obvious which of the variant readings is the most authentic. In some cases two or more variants appear at first glance to be equally plausible candidates for authenticity. This work of thorough analysis of the variants from which we can expect a critical editee of high reliability and authenticity to eventually emerge, is a large undertaking which will likely not be completed for several years. Until that analysis is completed, the urtext is overall the most complete and accurate rendition of the original dictation available. It has fewer omissions and editing mistakes than later versions, and it is more complete than the earlier notes and otherwise mostly identical to the notes. To facilitate identification and assessment of variants, this print edition is complemented by an optical data disc containing both photographic facsimile and searchable e-text copies of the historical scribal manuscripts which are currently available. These are all substantially cross-referenced to a single universal reference system such that with a bit of practice, one can locate any particular passage in any particular version in a matter of seconds. A concordance has also been prepared for the Urtext and HLC versions. With these tools, the reader who is curious as to the originality or authenticity of a particular passage can quickly check to see how it was rendered in other versions. With this information, the reader can assess the variants for herself. It is frequently the case, especially with the more heavily edited versions, that a perplexing passage immediately becomes clear when checked against the original dictation. Many of the perplexities in the later versions are simply copying mistakes. Others are confusing because they have been removed from their original context. Yet others are clearer in light of the expanded discussion originally dictated. In some cases, ambiguous readings become clear simply by seeing which words were originally emphasized. Currently we have completed 2 of the 3 pre-1976 versions as substantially accurate e-texts. The HLC completed in 2006 and the Urtext completed in 2008. The notes has only been partly transcribed into e-text form. When that ongoing work is finished, it will be quite easy to generate a comprehensive list of all the editing changes between all the known versions, or a catalog of variant readings. Armed with that list of all the editing changes and the tools of textual scholarship, it should be fairly easy to evaluate all variants and sort them into those which are obviously mistakes, those which are obviously corrections, and those which are uncertain. While further research may ultimately establish some uncertain variants as either corrections or mistakes, if one were to simply reproduce the course with all the obvious mistakes corrected, all the obvious corrections preserved, and the uncertain variants simply footnoted, one would have a significantly more complete and accurate version than any one of the known historical versions. Such a version would include the most authentic material from all sources, correct the obvious mistakes, preserve all later corrections of earlier errors, and footnote any uncertainties. There are several purposes for this edition and for its publication at this time. The objective of identifying all editing changes in order to sort and evaluate them required accurate e-texts of each of the historical scribal versions. Preparing such a list manually by visually comparing the facsimile image files is enormously labor-intensive and very prone to error. Since we want accurate e-texts from which print editions can be typeset anyway, and since the easiest and most reliable way of generating a catalog of variant readings is to have a computer compare the versions, the first stage of the process is to generate accurate e.t.x. machine-readable copies of each version which can then be compared with software which can quickly identify every difference. Of course, as each manuscript was completed and proofed for accuracy, it was possible to format the electronic text for printing. Since there is a substantial public demand for print copies and since most of the copies in circulation are exceedingly inaccurate, we felt it would be very inappropriate not to make these more accurate e-texts available in print editions as soon as they were completed. The increasing popularity and influence of the course makes it more important than ever that the course be available in the most complete and accurate form possible with all genuine uncertainties honestly disclosed rather than disguised. The authority and credibility of its message is severely reduced by the presence of typos and omissions and distortions which focus attention away from the importance of the message and onto the shortcomings of the copy in use. As more people read it and more people quote it, and its ideas gain more influence, minor errors can have a major deleterious impact on the public dialogue. So too, the perception that an edition is GHLY unreliable undermines both public confidence and the perceived authority of the material, even where the particular passage in question is entirely accurate. Where the focus should be on the meaning of the words and the ideas they symbolize, we often end up being sidetracked by the fact that some of the words were miscopied. Instead of focusing on the message, the focus turns to the message. And the message itself can get lost in the process. Where the question should be, is the message authentic? What too often happens is a debate as to whether the copy is accurate. That kind of uncertainty is not difficult to dispel with honest, thorough scholarship. That kind of uncertainty is regrettably exacerbated by editions which claim a level of accuracy much greater than they actually deliver. When the messenger is found to be misleading and the advertising false, many have mistakenly extrapolated that therefore the message must also be fraudulent. When dealing with material which claims authorship by Jesus of Nazareth, inevitably there will be skepticism and the suspicion that this claim arises not from truth, but rather from delusions or outright fraud. The important area of investigation in terms of the authority and authenticity of this material relates to the process by which Helen Schucman first put these words on paper in her notebooks, the later copying and editing mistakes are really an entirely separate issue with no necessary reflection on the authenticity of the original dictation. Later copying mistakes are irrelevant to the basic question, just how did Schucman come up with these words and where did they come from in the first place? Was her belief that she was hearing Jesus of Nazareth correct? Was she mistaken? Or was she a conspirator in a grand hoax? The most important question of fraud relates to the original scribing and whether Schucman really heard a voice or simply composed the material herself, with possible input from others, and then later misrepresented the material either because she suffered from delusions or because of deliberate fraud. This is the basic question every skeptic will have for the material. Indeed, as a basic question, every reader should ask and must answer because one's opinion of the authorship cannot help but influence one's opinion of the authority. It is much more difficult to answer that question from inaccurate, abridged copies than it is from the actual primary source material itself, or at least accurate copies of that material. The question of who is the author of this material is not important to everyone. But it is important to many, and answering it with confidence is severely hampered by lack of access to the actual authentic original dictation as first recorded. The decades of suppression of primary source material have only managed to increase doubt and convince many skeptics that there really must be something to hide. What other motive could there be for trying to keep the source material secret? If Schucman was involved in a conspiracy to deceive, if she was honestly confused, if she was unknowingly exercising some unusual savant ability unconnected to anything supernatural, her perception of this work as being authored by Jesus is very likely mistaken. If there is evidence of such inadvertent or even deliberate deception, it will be found in the original notes and subsequent copying mistakes are quite irrelevant except that they serve to muddy the waters. However, the presentation of a substantially altered text as virtually unchanged not only introduces deceptio, and because that statement is far from being entirely true, it makes it all the more difficult to interrogate the really important witness, which is the original words as Schucman wrote them down. It gives skeptics some very good reasons to be even more doubtful of the integrity of the message when they find the messengers so notably lacking in that regard. The extent and nature of the editing changes is an interesting topic, but quite a different one from the question of the source and authenticity of the original dictation. Both questions will likely be researched and investigated for years to come. With further research we can expect increasing clarity, and quite probably that research will discover things which will surprise many. The author makes an interesting comment on the problem of scribal errors. From the notes 4:67. 6 As long as you read. 7 Take accurate notes, every 8 word is meaningful, but 9 can't always get through. 10 Whenever possible, I will. 11 Correct retroactively. 12 Sure to note all later. 13 Corrections. A few pages later in the notes, in a quote preserved in the Urtext, we read T1b30d. Contradictions in my word mean lack of understanding, or scribal failures, which I make every effort to correct. But they are still not crucial. The Bible has the same problem, I assure you, and it's still being edited. Consider the power of my word, and that it has withstood all the attacks of error, and is the source of truth. The sometimes lively debate about the importance of the errors is addressed here usefully in a manner which acknowledges the insight of two divergent viewpoints. By saying every word is meaningful, the author is saying that it's not wholly unimportant that the right words be put in the right place. Elsewhere he states that every word was carefully chosen. By saying that errors are not crucial, however, he's stating that getting the words right, although important, is not the only or even the most important thing. He says the power of my word can withstand error. And we have here an interesting and direct comparison of the course to the Bible as both being manifestations of the word which are imperfect and in need of correction. Elsewhere the author several times identifies errors in the Bible and sets out to correct them. While those holding the view that either the Bible or the course is infallible might take offense at this, those who recognize that no book is, or ever likely will be perfect, will be more inclined to look with interest at Jesus' suggested corrections. And finally we have the notion of retroactive correction, which suggests that the author intends to correct any scribal errors over time, presumably as much time as it takes. The idea that either the course or the Bible achieved a stat of perfection at a certain point in time from which no further improvements can be made is one that can be believed to be the truth, but it certainly cannot be demonstrated to be the truth. This retroactive correction has two necessary conditions. The first is a willingness to concede that there is at least some importance to identifying and correcting scribal and editing mistakes. We can't begin to cooperate with the author in the correction of mistakes if we deny there are any or insist that such errors in his words are entirely meaningless. A second necessary condition expressed several times in the course is that we must ask. We must ask and be willing to hear without filtering the voice of the Holy Spirit through our own preconceptions of what it should or shouldn't say, and instead seek only for what it really does say. Seek and ye shall find has a corollary. Don't seek and you won't find. This retroactive correction will take place whenever possible, and it is our goal to join in with all who are prepared to meet the necessary conditions to make it possible to present the course with the purity and integrity it so richly deserves. This edition of the Urtext Manuscripts is one important step toward that goal. I'd like to be very clear that it is far from my intent to attack or condemn other editions of A Course in Miracles which are somewhat lacking in accuracy and completeness, or those responsible for those editions. Such editions have blessed many lives and their shortcomings are not, as the author has stated, crucial. I firmly believe that those who have published the course in the past have done the best they could with the often limited skills and resources which were available to them at the time. I'm rather certain that in 1976 those responsible for the decision to publish were largely unaware of many of the problems with that version. I'm also convinced that the world is far better off because they did publish what they did when they did than would have been the case if they had waited for years attempting to proofread to perfection. If they felt it was just the way Jesus wanted it, I think they were right. I think Jesus wanted it in print, the errors were not crucial and did not want them to delay further. That does not mean, as some have argued, that it was free of errors or that Jesus didn't want to correct the copying mistakes later when there was more time and perhaps more willingness. There is a tendency among followers of most bodies of Scripture to wish to believe that their holy book is complete, inerrant, infallible, and the last word. I can certainly understand the desire for perfection and a clear definitive statement that is unambiguous and absolutely trustworthy now and forever. That sort of thing can't be put between the covers of a book, however. And it is a serious misperception to suppose that it can be. The living God is dynamic as is the relationship of love between himself and his creation. While the will of God is changeless T12F3. Its expression in time through people is not, and no body of symbols given through people at a particular point in history, can ever be the last thing God has to communicate to his creation. A book is static, like a snapshot. And like a photo, it can be accurate or it can be blurred by flaws and scratches and lose clarity through multiple recopying. But it is not alive. It does not find ever new forms with which to express the changeless truth. It is just one set of symbols from one moment in time, frozen in that moment. The author makes some useful comments on this aspect of words. The purpose of words is to limit, and by limiting to make a vast area of experience more manageable. But that means manageable by you. For many aspects of living in this world that is necessary. But not for asking. God does not use words and does not answer in words. He can only speak to the Christ in you, who translates his answer into whatever language you can understand and accept. Sometimes words will limit fear, sometimes not. That is why some people hear words, some receive feelings of inner conviction, and some do not become aware of anything. Yet God has answered, and his answer will reach you when you are ready. S1A7. God is the ultimate reality and words on pages are twice removed. This we must remember when we seek to project onto them real aspects of God such as infallibility, changelessness, perfection, inerrancy, etc. To project attributes of divine reality onto a symbol is really idolatry and magic thinking. It is the worship of symbols, or symbols of symbols. In place of the worship of that which is symbolized, the one thing that is real, God our Creator. Words are helpful if they direct our attention and concentration on reality. Words are counterproductive if we confuse them for reality and make of the symbols idolatrous objects of worship. In the last analysis, the best version of A Course in Miracles is the one you read, and the one to which you open your heart to the redemptive message of love and forgiveness, a message they all contain. One should also bear in mind that while for most readers faced with a variety of different versions, there is an obvious question about which one to choose, the respective versions are not competitors so much as they are complements. Each has unique strengths and weaknesses. Each is a witness to a single historical event, that even being Helen Schucman's hearing a remarkable discourse and her note-taking during that hearing. Schucman's hearing was not perfect. Her note-taking was not perfect. In her efforts to correct the errors in later editing, for a variety of reasons she ended up introducing progressively more new errors while fixing a few earlier ones each time. Each version then is a precious resource, and each gives us more information about that original event to which each is a witness. By retracing her steps backwards through the versions and the editing and copying mistakes, we can generally distinguish the mistakes from the corrections with ease and do what no version yet to appear has done, extract the best from each of them. I use the witness metaphor here for several reasons. Schucman can be thought of as an eyewitness or ear witness to an historical event. During the event she took notes, but did not take them without error. Later she reviewed her notes and retyped them. At least 4 times over the course of 10 years. Each time the story changed a little. Each time there were some inadvertent copying mistakes. It's not uncommon that human memories of events change over time. Memories don't always change over time. Sometimes humans can remember with astonishing photographic precision, but memories often change dramatically, and, except by comparison to such data as photos and original written records, we can't tell which memories are pristine and which have evolved. With that thought in mind, it certainly does seem likely, that the earliest record Schucman made of the event is most likely to be the most accurate, and is certainly less subject to inadvertent copying mistakes, and later evolved memories or even interpretation on her part. It is. For the purposes of reference, cross-reference, and citation, we have included 3 different reference systems, bold numbers inline which are the original manuscript page numbers. These make checking back to the original manuscript facsimiles very easy. For cross-referencing to the HLC, the chapter and section breaks from that version have been inserted. Say mostly correspond to the chapter and section divisions in the later FIP abridgments. For cross-referencing to the notes page number for each section heading is indicated. For more details on the referencing system, see Appendix 3, Notes. Note 1. While the intent was apparently to remove only the personal material, some sentences which appear to belong to the course, including T.W. O miracle principles which were buried within omitted pages of personal material were also omitted. These suspected inadvertent omissions of apparently authentic dictation are included in footnotes in this edition. Note 2. Word count chart by Doug Thompson. Approximate totals as measured by MS Word. Version. Word count. Incremental difference. Urtext version. 337,373 word count. 38,184 words omitted. From Urtext to HLC. Incremental difference. HLC version. 299,189 word count. 10,221 words omitted from HLC to FIP. Incremental difference. FIP version. 288,968 word count. 48,405 words omitted from Urtext to FIP incremental difference. Annotated HLC version. 301,647 word count. 35,726 words omitted from Urtext to annotated HLC incremental difference. Annotated HLC version. 301,647 word count. 2,458. Words added to the original HLC incremental difference. Note 3. From Encyclopaedia Britannica, see Appendix 2. What is the Urtext? For an expanded discussion. Note 4. It should be noted that these observations pertain largely to the text volume scribed between 1965 and 1968. Subsequent volumes experienced much less editing and have fewer differences, version to version. Note 5. Certain pupils have been assigned to each of God's teachers, and they will begin to look for him as soon as he has answered the call. They were chosen for him because the form of the universal curriculum that he will take is best for them in view of their level of understanding. Urtext M3A1. In philosophy, universalism is a doctrine or school claiming universal facts can be discovered. In certain religions, universality is the quality ascribed to an entity whose existence is consistent throughout the universe. Wikipedia. Universality philosophy. Universalism can be classified as a religion, theology and philosophy that generally holds all persons and creatures are related to God or the divine and will be reconciled to God. In Christianity, universalism refers to the belief that all humans can be saved rough Jesus Christ and eventually come to harmony in God's kingdom. Wikipedia. Universalism. Note 6. The claim to authorship is unusual and remarkable enough to have been commented upon by Schucman RSELF and many others over the years in numerous books and articles. A good starting point is Robert Perry's survey, which can be found at http://www.circleofa.org/articles/wowrateltelphp. Whether her belief that she heard the voice of Jesus of Nazareth is true is something that can hardly be conclusively proven one way or the other. One can weigh the evidence and come up with a balance of probabilities. But the result depends on what you consider to be valid evidence. For some, the test is, does it agree or disagree with the doctrines of my denomination? The answer will almost always be both yes and no, if that question is asked about this course or the doctrines of any other denomination. Were a Catholic and a Lutheran to interrogate the historical Jesus with that model, both would find him wanting, although in different ways. Just as the Jewish priests and scribes in Jerusalem found him wanting in the 1st century. They would also each find the other wanting. Ultimately, the question can only be answered by an individual in his heart, in consultation with the Holy Spirit. As Jesus said in John 10:3-6, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and leads them out. Whenever he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him. For they don't know the voice of strangers. Jesus spoke this parable to them, but they didn't understand what he was telling them. Note 7. For a more complete discussion of the version, see Appendix 2. Note 8. Britannica describes the word urtext as referring to a piecing together of primary sources with the intent of reflecting the author's original intent with no modification. By and large, this is exactly what the scribe's urtext is. For a deeper textual analysis of the manuscript, see Appendix 2, identifying the Urtext Manuscripts. Note 9. For more on version identification, see Appendix 1. Note 10. I have made every effort to use words which are almost impossible to distort, but man is very inventive when it comes to twisting symbols around. T3C9. Note 11. See in particular T1B15B, T1B25I, T1B30G, T1B30AA, T2B38, for a few examples of the author's emphasis on the necessity of asking. Note 12. See Appendix 5 for details on the editorial principles applied in the preparation of this edition. Acknowledgements. This work owes its existence to an enormous number of people, many of whom I do not know personally and am unlikely to ever meet in this lifetime. who have made available the raw materials from which this compilation was made. My role has largely been a clerical task of collecting, collating, referencing, annotating, documenting, and proofing source material made available by others. There are so many whose contributions played a crucial role in making this publication possible that naming them all is impractical. You know who you are. In particular, those who prepared the initial e-texts of the HLC and the Urtext in 2000, which provided the raw material to proof, deserve special mention, though I don't know your names. Your work has made my work possible. To each of you I express my deep gratitude for providing the source materials without which this work would have remained impossible. To all those who have helped with proofreading and critiques I owe much. The quality and accuracy of this material is much higher for your contributions. I am eternally grateful in every sense of the word. To those whose proofreading and critiques will identify imperfections I have yet to detect and correct, I offer my thanks in advance. Special thanks to Deborah Maltman for the many hours of proofreading and moral support, Jerry Merrick for his encyclopedic grasp of English grammar, and Robert Perry, whose wise counsel in the early phases of this project was enormously helpful in helping me understand the difference between a mistake that needed fixing and an intentional novel turn of phrase, and Doug Monkton, whose advice and help in the final design has helped produce a result that is much better than it otherwise would have been. Doug Thompson, July 2008. A note about the proof copy e-text edition. Assembling this rather large project has proven to be both complex and error-prone. Many thanks to all who have helped us spot issues. As errors are detected and fixed, the copy made available online is of course updated with the latest fixes. To see whether your copy is the latest, check the date on the bottom of page II. In order for the URL to remain the same, the file name will not change with minor fixes, only with major new releases. The file size and file creation date and the date on this page will be your clues for version identification. The URL for the Scholars Toolbox website is http://www.execulink.com dthomp75 2008 index.htm. The URL for the most recent version of this file is http://www.execulink.com _dthomp75 2008 etexts or %207 volume %20 etext %20 ls.pdf. While those two are subject to change, every effort will be made to provide pointers to new URLs at this URL. http://ca.geocities.com dthomp74ca. The latter URL should be permanent for a good long while anyway, and will contain links to new material as that comes into being. S is a proof copy because while we know there are still some problems with it, we don't know what they all are. We also believe it is the best there is, in terms of an accurate and complete printable and searchable copy of the Urtext. It seems a bit pointless to withhold this good copy, because it has not yet become a perfect copy. Indeed, its path toward perfection will be much speeded up, as we have more eyes looking at it and noticing imperfections. My email address for this project is dthomp74ca@yahoo.ca. Feel free to send me mail if you see anything you think needs attention. To order printed copies of the book or DVD, see http://miraclesinactionpress.com. Doug Thompson, December 2008.